In today's episode of Gateway Books by Crestance, we explore Her Lost Works, a novel about Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, alongside the groundbreaking works, A Vindication of the Rights of Women and Frankenstein. How did these women shape literature and feminism? Let's find out. Welcome to Gateway Books by Crestance. I'm your host, Cindy Cruz, and today we're exploring three fascinating books that connect history, literature, and the fight for women's rights. We begin with Her Lost Words, a historical novel that brings to life the extraordinary mother-daughter duo, Mary Wollstonecraft, the pioneering feminist writer, and Mary Shelley, the legendary author of Frankenstein. Their real-life stories intertwine with their literary legacies, making for a compelling read. To fully appreciate their impact, we'll also examine Wollstonecraft's bold manifesto, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and Shelley's timeless masterpiece, Frankenstein. How did these women shape literature and feminism? What echoes of their words still resonate today? Let's get to it. I just finished Her Lost Words by Stephanie Marie Thornton, and I have to say this book really made me think. It's about Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, a mother and daughter who never got the chance to know each other, whose lives were deeply connected through their writing. If you know anything about them, you probably already see why their stories make for a fascinating novel. Wollstonecraft was one of the first people to argue that women deserved the same education and rights as men, pretty groundbreaking for the era. And Mary Shelley, of course, gave us Frankenstein, one of the most famous novels of all time. Mary Wollstonecraft died shortly after giving birth. Mary Shelley grew up knowing her only through the books and letters she left behind. That's what this novel explores, the connection between these two women, even though they never met. Thornton does such a great job, making their stories feel personal, not just historical. It's like getting an inside look at their thoughts, fears, and ambitions. This book isn't just about what these women accomplished. Is about what it means to be a woman trying to make a name for yourself in a time when that was anything but easy. Both Wollstonecraft and Shelley believed in the power of writing. Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, arguing that women should be educated and independent. Not exactly a popular opinion at the time. Shelley, on the other hand, used fiction to explore big ideas about life, creation, and responsibility. Frankenstein isn't just a creepy monster story. It's about what happens when someone is brought into the world and then abandoned. And if you think about it, Mary Shelley probably understood that feeling better than most. Thornton really leans into this theme, showing how writing wasn't just something these women did, it was how they made sense of the world. Wollstonecraft refused to fit the mold of a proper woman. She traveled alone, had relationships outside of marriage, and made a living as a writer. People judged her harshly for it, but she didn't let that stop her. Mary Shelley followed in her mother's footsteps, though not intentionally. She ran off with Percy Shelley as a teenager, while he was still married to someone else, and society never really forgave her for it. Even after she wrote Frankenstein, a lot of people assumed her husband had actually written it, because obviously, a young woman couldn't have created something that brilliant. Thornton does a great job showing how both women fought to be taken seriously and how, despite everything, they kept going. This book also has a lot to say about grief. Wollstonecraft's life was full of heartbreak. She lost people she loved, faced financial struggles, and died before she could even raise her daughter. In Mary Shelley, she lost multiple children, her husband, and so many of the people closest to her. But neither of them gave up. They both turned their pain into something lasting. Wollstonecraft wrote about women's rights because she knew firsthand what it was like to have none. Shelley wrote Frankenstein, a novel about loneliness and creation while navigating her own losses. Thornton makes sure you feel every bit of that emotional weight without making the book feel overly heavy. One thing I really liked about Her Lost Words is how Thornton structured it. She switches back and forth between Wollstonecraft's and Shelley's perspectives, showing how their lives mirror each other even though they're decades apart. And this makes for such an engaging read because you're constantly seeing connections between their experiences. When Mary Shelley starts reading her mother's work, you can feel how much she's searching for some kind of connection, some way to know this woman who shaped her life but was never there. Thornton also uses real letters and historical documents, which makes everything feel even more authentic. It's a great reminder that these weren't just characters in a novel. They were real women who lived, struggled, and wrote their way into history. One of the most interesting parts of the book is how it explores the idea of a relationship that exists through words alone. Mary Shelley never met her mother, but she spent her whole life trying to understand her. She read A Vindication of the Rights of Women and probably saw parts of herself in it. She heard stories about Wollstonecraft's unconventional life and may have wondered if she would have been more like her if she had the chance. And in a way, Shelley kept her mother's legacy alive, just in a different way. Wollstonecraft wrote about the importance of women having intellectual freedom, and Mary Shelley proved that by becoming a novelist at a time when that was almost unheard of. Thornton captures this so well. You feel Mary Shelley's longing, her frustration, and her determination to make her own mark, just like her mother did. Reading her lost words gives us a deeper appreciation for the impact both these women had, not just on each other, but on the world. Mary Wollstonecraft's ideas about women's education, independence, and equality were radical for her time, and yet we can see their influence in so many of the women who came after her, including her own daughter. And Mary Shelley? She didn't just inherit her mother's words, she built on them in her own way. Where Wollstonecraft used essays to argue for women's rights, Shelley used fiction to explore ideas about power, creation, and what it means to be human. Now, let's take a step back and look at A Vindication of the Rights of Women, the book that made Wollstonecraft famous and infamous. And then we'll dive into Frankenstein, the novel that cemented Mary Shelley's legacy. How do these works reflect the experiences of the woman who wrote them? And what do they still have to say to us today? Let's find out. If her lost words gave us a glimpse into Mary Wollstonecraft's life, then A Vindication of the Rights of Women gives us her voice. Bold, fearless, and unflinching in its call for equality. Published in 1792, this work was unlike anything most people had seen before. It wasn't just a polite suggestion that women deserved better. It was a declaration that women were just as rational, just as capable, and just as deserving of education and independence as men. In her lost words, we see Wollstonecraft fighting to be taken seriously in a world that didn't believe women could be thinkers, writers, or intellectuals. Thornton plays a vivid picture of her struggles, earning her living with her pen, challenging societal norms, and daring to believe that she, a woman, could shape public discourse. Vindication of the Rights of Women is the book that proves that she wasn't just thinking about these things, she was shouting them from the rooftops. So what exactly does Wollstonecraft argue in this book? And how does her lost words help us understand the woman behind the words? At its heart, A Vindication of the Rights of Women is an argument for education. Wollstonecraft believed that women were not naturally inferior to men. They only seemed that way because they had been denied the same opportunities to learn and develop their minds. She wasn't saying that women should take over men's roles or that they were the same in every way, but she did insist that they should be seen as rational beings, capable of reason and independent thought. Her argument was radical at the time because it directly challenged the belief that women were meant to be passive, ornamental, and dependent on men. She also called out the way society encouraged women to focus on beauty, charm, and pleasing men instead of strength, intelligence, and virtue. She argued that a system that denied women education and independence was bad for everyone, not just women, because a society could only be as strong as its people, and half of those people were being kept ignorant. The book was groundbreaking, but it was also deeply personal. In her lost words, Thornton shows us the struggles Wollstonecraft faced firsthand. her frustration at being treated as less than, her desire for something more, and her determination to carve out a space for herself in a world that didn't want to make room. When you read Wollstonecraft's words in A Vindication of the Rights of Women, you can feel her anger, her urgency, and her hope that the world could be different. One of the most powerful things about reading her last words before diving into A Vindication of the Rights of Women is that it makes Wollstonecraft feel real, not just a historical figure, but as a person. Thornton's novel gives us details about Wollstonecraft's life that help explain why she was so passionate about these ideas. We see her working as a governess and realizing how little power women had when they were financially dependent on others. We see her writing for a living, an unusual choice for a woman at the time, and struggling to be taken seriously in a male-dominated literary world. On her own terms, rejecting the idea that marriage should be the only path for women, and later deciding to marry William Godwin, even though neither of them originally believed in marriage. And we see her facing judgment for her relationships, her ideas, and simply for being a woman who refused to stay silent. All of these experiences shaped A Vindication of the Rights of Women. It wasn't an abstract philosophical argument. It was born out of her own struggles. In her last words, there's a particularly moving moment when Mary Wollstonecraft gives birth to her second daughter, Mary Shelley. Thornton shows us Wollstonecraft's hopes and fears, her joy at having another chance at motherhood, and her determination to raise a daughter with the freedom and opportunities she always wanted for herself. She didn't live to see it, but that daughter, Mary Shelley, would grow up to be a writer who, in her own way, continued her mother's fights for women's independence and intellectual power. Mary Wollstonecraft fought to prove that women were rational, independent thinkers, and Mary Shelley proved it by becoming one. Though Frankenstein is a gothic novel rather than a feminist manifesto, it carries echoes of Wollstonecraft's ideas, questioning power, responsibility, and what happens when society abandons those it creates. Shelley, like her mother, used writing to explore deep, complex ideas, crafting a story that continues to resonate. Now, let's take a closer look at Frankenstein and the way it reflects both Shelley's personal experiences and the intellectual legacy she inherited. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one of the most enduring novels of all time. Often called the first work of science fiction, it's also a gothic horror story, a meditation about power and responsibility, and a deeply personal exploration of loss and abandonment. It's a novel that has been analyzed in countless ways, through feminist, philosophical, and literary lenses. But one of the most interesting things about it is how much of Mary Shelley herself is woven into the pages. We're focusing on the 1831 edition of Frankenstein, which Shelley revised and republished after the original 1818 edition. While both versions tell the same basic story, the 1831 edition reflects Shelley's more mature perspective on fate, personal responsibility, and the forces that shape human lives. Since this was the version Shelley wanted to be the definitive text, we're respecting the author's intent and discussing Frankenstein as she intended it to be read. But before we dive into the themes and ideas in Frankenstein, let's talk about its publication history, because the way this novel entered the world is just as fascinating as the story itself. When Frankenstein was first published in 1818, it was anonymous. The title page simply read Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus, with no author listed. This wasn't entirely uncommon for first-time novelists, but in Shelley's case, there were additional reasons for the secrecy. For one, women weren't expected to write novels like Frankenstein. They could write romances, moral tales, and poetry, but a book about scientific hubris, horror, and creation gone wrong, that was considered far too serious and disturbing for a woman to have written. At the time, the idea of a young woman, even one from an intellectual background, crafting such a dark and philosophical novel was almost unthinkable. There was also the issue of Mary Shelley's reputation. By the time she wrote Frankenstein, she was already considered scandalous. She had eloped with Percy Shelley when she was still a teenager, while he was still married to someone else. The literary world was still whispering about that when Frankenstein was published, and attaching her name to the book might have overshadowed the work itself. Once the book was released, people assumed Percy Shelley was the author. He had written a preface, which didn't help, and many critics thought the novel's depth and complexity meant it must have been written by a man. It wasn't until the second edition, in 1823, that Mary Shelley's name appeared on the title page. By then, Frankenstein had already gained a reputation, and people were shocked to learn that the book had been written by a young woman. Knowing this backstory makes reading Frankenstein even more powerful. It was a novel that defied expectations from the very beginning. There's a reason that Frankenstein has been studied and reinterpreted for over 200 years. The novel is rich with themes that still feel relevant today. Let's explore some of the biggest ideas in the book and what they reveal about Mary Shelley's life, her mother's influence, and the historical context of her time. At its heart, Frankenstein is about what it means to create something and what happens when you abandon it. Victor Frankenstein is obsessed with pushing the limits of human knowledge. He doesn't just want to study life, he wants to create it. But the moment his creature comes to life, he is horrified. And instead of taking responsibility for what he has done, he flees, leaving the creature alone to fend for itself. This theme has been interpreted in many ways. It's often seen as a warning about unchecked scientific ambition, a topic that was becoming increasingly relevant in the early 19th century, but it's also deeply personal. Think about Mary Shelley's life. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, died shortly after giving birth to her. Shelley grew up reading her mother's work, trying to understand who she was and searching for a connection with a woman she never met. In many ways, she must have felt abandoned. Not by choice, but by circumstance. It's not hard to see echoes of this in the creature's story. He, too, is desperate for connection, for someone to guide him. And when that doesn't happen, he is left angry, lost, and searching for meaning. In A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Wollstonecraft argues that women are abandoned by society when they are denied education and independence. Without guidance or support, they are left powerless. In a strange way, Frankenstein's creature experiences something similar. He is intelligent and capable, but without guidance, he is cast out and forced to survive in a world that fears him. Both Victor Frankenstein and his creatures suffer from extreme isolation. Victor isolates himself from his family while working on his experiment, and later, when he realizes what he has done, his guilt drives him even further into loneliness. The creature, on the other hand, never has a choice. He is rejected from the moment he is created. Mary Shelley knew isolation well. After Percy Shelley died, she spent much of her life as a widow, raising their son alone and struggling to earn a living. Even before that, she had faced rejection from society because of her unconventional life choices. Thornton's Her Lost Words highlights this very well. It shows Mary Shelley not just as a literary figure, but as a woman constantly searching for acceptance and understanding. One of the biggest differences between the 1818 and 1831 editions of Frankenstein is how Victor views fate. In the 1818 edition, Victor takes more personal responsibility for his actions. He acknowledges that his ambition led to the creature's suffering, and while he tries to justify his choices, he never fully blames outside forces. In the 1831 version, Shelley adds more references to fate and destiny, making it seem as though Victor was doomed from the start. This shift likely reflects Shelley's own changing worldview. By 1831, she had lost her husband and several of her children. She had experienced so much grief that she may have begun to see life as more determined by fate than by personal choice. This version also softens Victor's ambitions, making him more of a tragic figure rather than a purely arrogant scientist. Reading Frankenstein alongside A Vindication of the Rights of Women and Her Lost Words gives us a richer understanding not just of the novel, but of the woman who wrote it. From Wollstonecraft Shelley inherited the belief that women's voices mattered, even in a world that tried to silence them. From her own life, Shelley knew what it was like to feel isolated, abandoned, and misunderstood. She poured those feelings into the creature, creating one of literature's most complex and tragic figures. And throughout her writing, she proved her mother's argument that women could be just as intellectually and creatively powerful as men. Frankenstein isn't just a gothic horror story. It's a novel about what it means to create, what it means to be abandoned, and what it means to search for meaning in an unpredictable world. And now, over 200 years later, we're still talking about it. I'd say that is proof that Mary Shelley's words were never lost at all. This episode of Gateway Books was brought to you by Crestance, because we know that your love for books doesn't stop at reading. Whether you're stacking your shelves with historical fiction or filling your home with bookish-themed decor, we're here to support your literary obsession in style. And if you're more of a listener than a page-turner, you can check out the books we discussed today for free by clicking the link below to audiobooks.com. Dive into Her Lost Words, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, or Frankenstein, and experience these incredible stories in a whole new way. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into historical fiction and the real history behind it. See you next time as we continue exploring the stories that bring the past to life. I'm your host, Cindy Cruz, and I'll see you soon.